What's up, guys, and welcome to Module 3 of the WICO Compass. I'm super excited about this module because it's so high yield, it's so important, and the things you're going to learn in this module, I think, are really going to be kind of the core foundation of the strategies that you use to get through your pre-medical journey successfully. And so this module is all about building a strong academic foundation. And it's no secret that medical schools expect academic excellence in their applicants. This module is going to teach you strategies, it's going to give you information, and help you with knowledge that you need to build that strong academic foundation that you will use to help you get into medical school. We're going to talk about primarily strategies, planning strategies to help you build that strong academic foundation. We're going to teach you a little bit about how to manage your time in college. We're going to talk about study strategies, and we are going to talk about how medical schools view academics on your application. And perhaps most importantly, we are going to talk about how to recover from a tough semester, a bad semester, and move on to the next one with grace. So first of all, I want to kind of give a quick overview of what your science foundation is going to look like in terms of the classes that you take. This is kind of the core classes that medical schools generally expect you to take as part of their prerequisite requirements. And the reason I'm covering this is because it's going to come up here in just a few minutes in terms of how you plan your semesters. So almost all medical schools require these courses. There are some that don't. Most do. Most medical schools require 1 year of general biology. That's your introductory biology 1 and 2 with lab. Most schools require a year of general chemistry with lab. That's your 1211 and 1212, your 101, 102 chemistry, kind of your introductory general chemistry. Most medical schools require 1 to 2 semesters of organic chemistry with the lab. And the reason I said 1 to 2 semesters instead of a year is because many medical schools require only 1 semester of OChem with lab. And then they will allow you to potentially replace that second semester of organic chemistry with 1 semester of biochemistry. In fact, the medical school that I attended had that type of system going. Some do, some don't. And it's important later as you begin to build your school list to kind of know, what do they require? One thing is true, though, generally, and that is that if you take 1 to 2 semesters, or rather, if you take 2 semesters of organic chemistry with the lab, you have typically filled the requirement. It's pretty rare that medical schools require 2 semesters of OChem and a semester of biochem, although there are schools that do, but usually 2 semesters of OChem kind of fills that requirement. Almost all medical schools also require 1 year of physics. Most people opt for the trig-based physics as opposed to the calculus-based physics. That being said, there are additional non-science courses that some medical schools require. That's going to be English, that's going to be history, stuff like that. We're not listing them here because they're kind of not the courses that you think of when you think about courses that can really impede your progress, impede your progress through college. These are the ones that tend to trip people up in some form or fashion. So the key takeaway here is that science and lab courses are the foundation of a pre-medical education. And these are the things that are largely tested on the MCAT. These are the things that medical schools tend to require. These are the things that you're going to be doing in college if you intend to go to medical school. Now, the reason I specifically listed those classes is because, again, those are the classes that tend to trip people up. Those are the classes that tend to cause people's GPA to suffer. And I want to talk about some kind of high-yield things that you need to be thinking about when it comes to how you're going to manage those courses in your schedule. One very, very, very important thing to recognize is that you must avoid, if possible, taking more than 2, powerful, kind of robust science classes per semester. What that means is you don't want to find yourself taking, general biology, general chemistry, and physics all in the same semester. That's going to be a tough semester, a really tough semester. And if you can avoid it, you probably should. There's often really no reason to do that. And I encourage people, when possible, avoid taking more than 2 of those big science classes in a semester. So what are you going to do instead? Well, you're going to use the arts and the humanities, things like history, things like communications, things like English, to kind of balance out your schedule. And I think it's important to make sure that when you're building a schedule for a semester, you should keep time open in your schedule to use office hours, TA hours, and tutor hours, because I really do think you'll need them. And even if you don't think you do, it tends to help, really. It tends to help kind of bolster your academic performance to utilize these services that are often free at most colleges. Tutor hours sometimes cost money, but at least at the college I went to, it was free to utilize a tutor. And so I encourage people, hey, when you're building your schedule, maybe you could squeeze in one more class, but is it really a good idea? Is it going to take up time in your schedule that you may need to use office hours, TA hours, and tutor hours for other courses, especially those important science courses? Another strategy that I tell people when they're building their semester schedule is if you feel like you need to kind of pile on those classes and get them in where you can, but you're worried about how difficult the semester could be and how time-consuming the classes you're going to take could be, I encourage people to use summer classes to kind of spread things out. And the reason I like to do this is because if you utilize summer classes, you can simply basically defer courses to a future time. If you want to take 5 classes in a semester, but you're like, oh, that may not be the best idea, well, take one of those classes in the summer if possible. And I think that's a great way to keep things spread out and keep from piling too much on your plate in a given semester. And it's important to recognize that if you take on too much in a single semester, you can tank your GPA. It's not uncommon to find people taking too much in a semester, doing too much in a semester, and then everything kind of suffers as a result. And it's these strategies that I think can help you avoid tanking your GPA. So what's the high yield takeaway here? Well, a good academic strategy, meaning a good strategy for building your semester, is one that protects your GPA. You have to protect your GPA as a pre-medical student. It's not always the case that your GPA reflects your academic prowess, let's say, but what is true is that your GPA reflects the strategies that you used. It reflects the strategies that you used for studying. It reflects the strategies that you used for test taking, but it also reflects the strategies that you used for building your schedule. And so remind yourself that the goal is to protect your GPA, especially through those science courses, because your science GPA is considered a separate GPA from your cumulative GPA in terms of how medical schools look at your GPA. You must protect it. And for that reason, you may consider using these strategies to help you protect your GPA by not piling too much on in a given semester. Now, in addition to that, I think that there are some other things that can be really, really helpful when you're trying to build a semester. I say begin preparing in advance, meaning kind of know in advance what courses you intend to take in a given semester. Maybe you're halfway through a given semester and you're not really thinking about what you're going to take in the next semester. And I encourage people to go ahead and look at the course schedule for the following semester as soon as it's available, and just kind of see what is available to take and begin kind of thinking about how you're going to build your semester in advance. If you fail to prepare, you prepare to fail. And this is a great way to kind of avoid getting caught off guard by, oh, well, only these classes are available at this time, or these classes filled up, or whatever. If you prepare in advance by looking at the potential schedule in advance, it can help you. I also encourage people to talk to upperclassmen to know which professors are best for specific courses. Many courses have multiple offerings. Who should you take? Maybe who should you avoid? Remember, you've got to protect your GPA. Who are the best professors to take for those courses? Sometimes I think it's helpful to use the Rate My Professor feature online. Take it with a grain of salt. Everybody can say anything about anyone. And I encourage people to take the things that they see on Rate My Professor about given professors with a grain of salt, because all it takes is one person having a really bad experience, or 2 or 3 people having a really bad experience in a given semester, to kind of tank the rating for a given professor that may actually be a great professor for you. So again, grain of salt on that. This is an unconventional but kind of, I think, relatively high yield thing that you can do to protect your GPA, and that is actually audit courses before taking them. This is not available to everyone. This is not always available at all colleges, but the university that I went to allowed you to sit in on a course. You weren't actually taking the course. You didn't actually take the exams, but you got to consume the content. You didn't have to pay for it. It didn't go on your transcript, but you could expose yourself to the information in advance. And this was actually the strategy that I used with organic chemistry. I audited organic chemistry before taking it, and it kind of got me plugged in earlier, and I was seeing that material for the second time when I actually took the course, and I had already kind of learned enough of the foundation that some of the main things that trip people up really weren't tripping me up, and I was able to get an A in organic chemistry because of that. So I encourage people, if you have the time, if you have the ability, that's a strategy that you may use for a course that is, at least at your university, considered exceedingly difficult. Now, the last strategy that I want to talk about here is you got to know when to hold them and you got to know when to fold them. It is important to recognize how a W and an F and a WF affect your GPA. At my university and at almost all universities, if you fail a class, it affects your GPA, of course, right? But if you WF a class, meaning you withdraw fail the class, it also affects your GPA the exact same way as an F does. Now, what is a WF? Usually a WF is when you withdraw from a class after the drop deadline, which is usually about halfway through the course, halfway through the semester. However, on the contrary, a W does not often affect your GPA. At least at my university, if you withdrew from a class before the drop deadline, it doesn't affect your GPA. And if necessary, taking a W may be the best strategy available to you for a given class. If you are really struggling, you've come up on the midway point of the semester, you're coming up on the withdrawal deadline, and you're like, oh my gosh, I got a 52 on the first exam and a 61 on the second exam. It doesn't look like it's going to be possible for me to even pull a B out of this class. It may be advisable to just take the W and come back to the class later. I had to do this. I had to do this for an immunology course. I wasn't locked in on that course. I really didn't have the study strategies I needed to do well in that course. I came up on the add drop deadline, or rather the withdrawal deadline, and I was like, I don't think there's any way that I can pull the grade out of this class that I want to pull out of this class. And so what I did is I withdrew from the class to protect my GPA, and then I continued staying in the class. So basically what I did was audit the course. I just continued to show up. The professor was very generous and allowed me to continue to consume the material, and I sat through the class for the entire semester. And I think it really helped me because I got an A in the course the next time I took it. So know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to take a W. And I'll tell you something right now. This is revealing a lot about my individual experience in college. I had 8 W's on my transcript. 8 W's. Not one person asked me about it in my interview. No one asked me about it in any proceedings with the university when I was interviewing, when I was talking to the university. And I think it was because in my essays and personal statement and things like that, I kind of had an explanation for the things that happened. A lot of those W's came from the 2 semesters after my father passed away when I was in college. And I think that helped kind of frame the context of those W's. Suffice to say, a W protects your GPA, whereas an F and a WF don't. So if it comes down to the wire, just remember, this is always better than this, 100% of the time, because it protects your GPA. So the high yield takeaway here is that unconventional strategies can be extremely helpful if you use them correctly. It can be unconventional to audit a course or take a W or whatever the case, but they can help you if you use them correctly. So moving on, I want to talk about some specific study strategies that I think are just ridiculously high yield, things that you need to apply to every single course that you take forever and always. And the first one is that when you are in a class, you do not move on until you understand the content. Think about this. You're coming up on your first exam for a course and you get a 73% on the exam. And then you move on to the next module or unit or whatever the case is for that class. And you get, a 71% on the next exam. What you did is you essentially said, when you got that 73, you said, well, I'm going to leave 27% of the material kind of left outside of my realm of expertise. You basically just took a quarter of everything that was taught in that module and kind of left it on the table. And most courses are cumulative in the sense that they build upon one another. And so what you've basically done is just left a quarter of the information that you needed to know on the table. It is very, very important that you discover what it is that you missed, discover what it is that you didn't know with each exam, and integrate that into your study plan for the next module. Do not move on until you understand the content that you missed on an exam. Another very, very important technique and strategy that I use is you have to know your resources that are available to you and really try them out. What are the resources that are available to you in that course? Are there YouTube videos for that course? Are there really, really high yield guides or something like that for that course? This is very common for organic chemistry, biology, biochemistry courses that are tested on the MCAT. What are those resources? Try them out, use them, know what they are. Here's a really big one. Understand definitions, charts, and graphs for the course that you're taking, especially these science courses. Why am I bringing this up? Because this seems kind of specific. Well, it's almost always that courses test definitions, and it's almost always that courses test your ability to interpret information that is taught in the course in the form of charts and graphs. You're going to lose points if you don't know your definitions, and you're going to lose points if you don't know your charts and graphs, if you can't interpret them. And I'm going to show you one on the next slide to give you an example, and I think this is a very, very high yield thing. The reason also that I think this is very high yield is because this is a fundamental skill needed for the MCAT, and you need to begin developing this skill early when you're actually taking these courses. Use practice problems whenever possible. Practice questions, some people call it. You need to see the content in its kind of native form in the way that it's tested on exams and on the MCAT, and you want to practice seeing it in that form and kind of using and interpreting and applying that information that way. Use YouTube whenever possible, right? If you're going for a drive, you're going out to dinner, you're going somewhere for the weekend, jump on YouTube, listen to a lecture. This is super, super easy. It's just an easy way to continue to integrate additional exposure to the content when you have downtime. I do this all the time in medical school. And another important thing is everyone loves flashcards because they're fast, but you've got to know when they work and when they don't. There are some things that are tested in science courses that lend themselves very well to flashcards, especially if it's things that require a lot of exposure, equations, right? Definitions, terms. But ultimately, flashcards are going to be better for those types of things than they are for things like understanding processes and systems. Flashcards are great. Anki, for example, is a great flashcard system, but it doesn't work for 100% of content that is available to you in your courses. You got to know when it works and when it doesn't, and understand that they have their place, but they're not a foolproof study strategy when used alone. Now, let me hit this thing about the graphs and the charts. I'm using this as an example because this is such a high yield skill that you have to apply in your science classes. So we've got this graph here, and the graph is the differential influence of species C, which is down here. What is species C? It doesn't matter. It's just whatever. It's arbitrary. But what is the influence that it has on species A and B? Okay, well, I see species A here is in this gold line, and I see that species B here is in this blue line. And what is happening to species A and B via species C? So you're going to look at this and be like, I don't really know what I'm looking at here. And that's kind of exactly the point, because you're just getting this random chart that doesn't really tell you much, but you have to interpret what you're seeing. Such a high yield skill. Okay, so let's ask ourselves, as the relative abundance of species C increases across this x-axis, what happens to species A? So we're just focusing on species A. We're not super worried about what's happening with species B here. So let's see what happens to species A. So does it increase linearly? Well, no. That appears to be species B, so that's not the answer. Does it decrease non-linearly? Maybe. Does it remain constant? Well, no, because the graph changes shape. Does it fluctuate unpredictably? I don't know. It looks kind of predictive. So what's the best answer here? Well, I think the best answer here is that it decreases non-linearly. Species A does decrease, it doesn't increase, and it does so in kind of a non-linear fashion. Does that make sense? Okay, that's just an example of your ability to look at a graph, look at a chart, and kind of interpret what's happening to these different items on the graph and answer a question correctly about it. So again, the answer here is B. So this is just a really, really, really high yield and important study strategy. Know how to interpret charts and graphs. They're coming up in every single science class. They're coming up all over the MCAT. It's very, very important. Now, I want to talk about something slightly in a different direction. How do medical schools view your academic record? And I think this is important because when you're building a strong academic foundation, you need to understand what it is that medical schools are going to kind of use to look at your academic record. How are they going to interpret it? Well, medical schools, it's suffice it to say, they're going to use your academic record to interpret how you will perform in medical school. And that is why a robust academic record is very important. Medical school is harder than college, in my opinion. In fact, it's much harder. And so I think it's important to recognize that medical schools are using your performance in college to kind of interpret how you will perform in medical school. But one thing is true here. Trends in your GPA are far more important than any particular course or grade. What that means is, yes, you can get into medical school with C's on your transcript. Yes, you can get into medical school with maybe an F or 2 or 3 on your transcript. It is all about the trend. Did your grades tend to go up as you progress through college, or did your grades trend down as you went through college? That's an important question that medical schools want to see in your GPA on your transcript. What medical schools also know is that an upward trend in your GPA, maybe the first semester or 2 or 3 started out kind of rocky, but things just started going up as you progress through college, they're going to see that as an indication that you have an internal locus of control. You're able to take responsibility for your grades, and you're able to have continuous improvement. And this is a very, very important thing that I want people to take away. It is not about your individual grades. It is about what your trends in your grades say about how you behaved in college and the strategies and tools that you used, and how you adopted an internal locus of control and took responsibility for your grades. Now, I want to also talk about how to recover from a tough semester. There are many reasons that a semester can get squirrely. I just mentioned a moment ago that my father passed away when I was in college. The semesters that followed were not good. I had to withdraw from 2 semesters and I think a total of 7 classes. And so out of the 8 W's that were on my transcript, 7 of them came from the semesters that followed my father passing away. There are a lot of reasons that a semester can get squirrely. That was something that was outside of my control. I never predicted that my dad was going to pass away when he did. But that is not the only reason that a semester